What's going on, people? Today we're continuing to theorize how the plot of Attack on Titan would have totally changed if Levi had chosen Erwin to inherit the Colossal Titan. In this video we'll explain how the commander would respond to Eren doing the rumbling, why Historia would see memories from the distant past, and of course why there's a fire-breathing Titan. In addition, we'll break down why Floch would be making moves behind the scenes and how Willy Tybur would try to influence the scouts. But before we get into it, don't forget to smash that sub button if you haven't already, and be sure to stick around till the end if you want to see how all the different elements come together. Okay, so part 6 starts off in Liberio, which is a place that would still be rebuilding after it was mostly destroyed during the war 7 months ago. In the present day, an excited looking Falco would be running towards Gabi and Zofia because he'd received an important letter addressed to all warrior candidates. What makes this letter special is that it was personally written to them by Pieck, who's someone they haven't seen or heard from since her, Magath and Willy Tybur had to flee the country. Ever since that night, Marley's government has been under the control of Hizuru, which is why the Card Titan was never able to send any messages. Inside her letter though, she'd explain how the political situation has drastically changed, with many countries, including Hizuru, forming a secret alliance against Eren. If everything goes to plan, this global alliance will soon capture the founding Titan, and might also reclaim the other shifters that were stolen from Marley. This is the news that got Falco excited, because it means his older brother still has a chance of inheriting the Beast Titan, but in Gabi's case, her priorities would be totally different. In the past year, all of her immediate family has been killed by the scouts, with her cousin Reiner being eaten by Floch, her aunt Karina being blown up by Eren, and her parents being crushed by the falling debris. At the time of their deaths, Gabi was deployed in the Middle East alongside the rest of the Eldian Unit, and so she never got the chance to help her family or say goodbye to anyone. This led to her being essentially cursed by a never-ending feeling of guilt, and gradually her desire to become a warrior became overshadowed by her desire to get revenge. In her mind, the only thing she wants the Global Alliance to do is give every island devil the most painful deaths imaginable, but just as the words leave her mouth, the three of them would abruptly manifest in the past dimension. Out of nowhere, Gabi, Zofia and Falco would hear the voice of Eren Yeager, who introduces himself to the entire Eldian race by using the power of the coordinate. During this speech, he'd explain that in response to the island being recently attacked, it's proven to him that it's impossible to have peace between Eldia and the outside world. Therefore, to finally put an end to this cycle of hate, he's unleashed millions of Colossus Titans with the intention of wiping out every last enemy across the ocean. This declaration of mass murder would also be heard by the population back on the island, and later that evening, Premier Zachary would call an emergency meeting. In the process, Zachary would hear about how Eren gained Ymir's power and reversed the transformation of all Titans, making him virtually invincible. At this point, there's no person or weapon on the planet that has any chance of stopping him, but from Floch's perspective, that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. The Armored Titan would argue that even if they could somehow stop the rumbling, it would only put Eldia in a more dangerous position than they were before. In his opinion, any nation that survives this will inevitably rise up against them in the future, and so the safest option for their survival is to let Eren trample everything. However, although Erwin would see the cold logic in what Floch is saying, he'd tell the group that letting billions of people die shouldn't be what they want. In the years before humanity knew the outside world existed, there was still violence, inequality, and conspiracies happening within the three walls themselves. Bearing that in mind, eradicating all life outside the island will never be the final answer to their problems, and Erwin would admit that he wasted his one chance to stop Eren when they were in paths. This would cause Historia to angrily respond, claiming that they can't just give up, since she suspects that anyone, even Eren, would have doubts about murdering the whole human race. If the scouts can reach him before he goes too far with this, then she can once again use her royal blood to bring them into paths again and hopefully talk things out. Immediately though, Erwin would ask how they'd reach Eren in the first place, given that the rumbling is faster than any vehicle on the island. To outpace the founding Titan, they need something like Hizuru's flying boat, but currently the only ones that exist are with the Azumabito clan. Following a brief pause, Historia would reveal something that happened to her in Shiganshina soon after she ate the Jaw Titan. In the moment when she was lying unconscious, the Queen saw memories from a previous Titan shifter, but at the time she had no idea who the girl was. It was only after personally meeting Ymir that Historia realized a connection, since the girl in her vision had the exact same hollow eyes, and so did her two siblings. Based on the context, the Queen would now be certain that she saw the memories of Rose Fritz, commonly known as the second child of Ymir, and apparently the first ever Jaw Titan. In these flashbacks, Historia saw various snapshots of Rose's life, but by far the most clear vision was one of her flying over the battlefield. For whatever reason, Historia would have the innate feeling that she could do the same thing, maybe because she's also a member of the royal family, or possibly because Louise's Jaw Titan was created using the Beast Titan spinal fluid. Whatever the answer might be, the power to fly is something that she'd feel her Titan could be able to do, and Zachary would remark how this makes reaching Eren a possibility. This comment would cause Floch to have an outburst at the Commander-in-Chief, as he'd remind everyone that interfering with Eren could mean the death of the Eldian race. But before his speech goes any further, Erwin would cut him off to explain what they should do next. His plan is that tomorrow morning, Historia needs to test if she can really fly, and if the theory is true, then they'll come up with a strategy to locate the founding Titan. The commander would reassure Floch that no matter what happens, they don't have any intentions of hurting Eren, but rather they're just gonna find him and hopefully reason with him. Feeling outnumbered, the armored Titan would accept this proposal, although secretly he wouldn't be feeling too great about the whole situation. As the meeting then comes to an end, Zachary would ask about Willy Tybur and Pieck, to which Erwin would confirm that they're being held as prisoners underground. Up until now, they both refused to say anything, but in the morning, he and Levi are going to try again to get some answers. In the meantime though, the commander's main priority is dealing with all the Eldian refugees, who were used as weapons by the Global Alliance prior to being turned back into humans by Eren. Hours later, as the Wall Titans continued to march through the night, Mikasa would lay in bed questioning how all of this could happen. From her point of view, the real Eren would never trample innocent women and children, and so she tried to rationalize his actions by telling herself that Ymir must be controlling him. As Mikasa moves from one explanation to the next, Connie and Sasha would be making their way to Ragako village. Thanks to Eren undoing the transformation of every Titan, the two of them would have hope that Mrs. Springer also reverted into human form. For the past 5 years, she's been stuck in Ragako as an upside-down Titan, so if Eren really has ended her suffering, then that act of kindness would be enough to earn Connie's undying loyalty. Meanwhile, over in Shiganshina, Floch would have fallen asleep to the sound of the rumbling, and in his dreams he'd manifest in front of a tree. At the bottom of this tree would be an old grave covered in cracks, but as he leans closer, he noticed the name inscribed on it is none other than Eren Yeager. In his confusion, he'd keep staring at the headstone to make sure he's reading it correctly, but he'd soon get distracted by the objects flying overhead. As Floch turns around, he'd see a futuristic city in ruins, with strangely shaped aircrafts relentlessly dropping bombs all over the place. These bombs would cause the buildings to fall apart, and in the blink of an eye he'd be transported to the streets of an empty Shiganshina. Seeing the town in this state would remind him of how it looked 5 years ago, when he and Erwin were nearly killed here by the Beast Titan. Floch would think to himself that Eldia should never be allowed to end up in ruin like this again, and after suddenly waking up, he'd feel certain about what he has to do. To prevent his home from falling into ruin at the hands of the invaders, it's his responsibility to make sure Eren survives no matter what. The next morning, down in the prison cells, Pieck would wake up to the sight of Levi and the commander hanging around outside. Next to her, Willy would already be awake, but he'd still be too traumatized to speak after witnessing the rumbling firsthand. Without wasting any time, Levi would then begin interrogating the Cart Titan, because he'd want to know how she found out Zeke's location. Remember, only the highest ranking people like Zachary and Erwin were aware of its location. In fact, even the captain himself didn't know where it was until yesterday. For that reason, he'd want to know how a foreigner from Marley got a hold of that information, but during the questioning, Pieck would stay totally silent. This is when Erwin would jump in, as he tried to get a reaction by telling both prisoners the rumbling is their fault for attacking the island. The Cart Titan would respond by glaring directly at him, and after getting her attention, the commander would slightly change his tone. In a moment of honesty, he'd reveal that he personally didn't want this to happen, and although Eldia has no method of stopping Eren by force, there's still a chance that they might be able to save some lives. Looking Pieck in the eyes, he'd ask her if she still has people in Marley that she wants to save, causing her to think back to the young warrior candidates. The Cart Titan would feel like a failure for giving them false hope with that letter, since by now Gabi, Falco and the rest must have worked out the Global Alliance was defeated. At the same time, Willy would think about his wife and his many children, and the mental image of them getting trampled by the rumbling would make him want to throw up. Following this, Erwin would claim that despite being enemies, he's willing to save their families if they tell him what he needs to know. Pieck would reply by asking why they should trust him, but before she can finish, a desperate Willy confesses that it was Kiyomi who told them Zeke's location. For several years, Hizuru have been desperate to improve their global reputation, but after invading Marley, things hadn't been going as well as they expected. This is largely because Willy had been using his political and media connections to turn the world against her, with the Azumabito getting hit with economic sanctions. Gradually, Kiyomi became so desperate to turn things around that when Willy contacted her, she was more than willing to listen to his proposal. The deal they agreed was that in exchange for her passing on vital information, Hizuru would gain two things. Number one, they'd no longer be viewed as friends of the Eldian Empire, which meant no more economic sanctions. And number two, in the future they'd gain exclusive access to Eldia's natural resources. Erwin would reply, pointing out that the Azumabito already have access to the Iceburst Stone, but Willy would explain that Hizuru wanted all of the reserves. If the Global Alliance had been successful in their plan to steal the founder, it was Ambassador Kiyomi who then planned to take full control over the island. After hearing that revelation, Erwin would feel an incredible sense of disappointment since his biggest ally turned out to be a traitor just like Eren predicted. This would cause the commander to rethink whether they should even try to stop the rumbling, because without Hizuru's technology on their side, the island would become incredibly vulnerable when modern weapons surpass the power of the Titans. Noticing the look on Erwin's face, Willy would tell him there's still one path they can take where everyone survives, but it would involve making one sacrifice. To explain this plan, he'd start by confessing that he's always viewed being Eldian as a curse, and if it was up to him, he'd never have been born in the first place. Having said that, hearing Eren's declaration made him realize that he is afraid of dying, and more importantly, he doesn't want any of his kids to die either. Saving their lives is what matters to him more than anything else, and to accomplish that, he's willing to help Erwin in whatever way he can. The commander would question what exactly Willy is suggesting here, and this is when he'd reveal something pretty interesting. 100 years ago, the Tybur family took credit for defeating Karl Fritz, who was one of their previous founding titans, and from that moment they were all treated like royalty despite being Eldians. Thanks to the actions of his ancestors, Willy enjoyed a life where no one ever judged him for being a subject of Ymir, proving that humans and Eldians can trust each other under the right circumstances. Just like how the Tyburs are widely known as heroes who save the planet, the same could happen for Erwin and the Scouts if they somehow stop the rumbling. To guarantee that no one lays a finger on the island, Willy could use his political influence to tell the story of how they saved humanity from extinction. His reputation as a Tybur would make people more willing to accept the Scouts as their saviors, but of course the sacrifice is that they'd have to kill Eren. Without Eren's death, the story would feel incomplete, as the world would still view Eldia as a threat to all of their lives. For that reason, the founding titan has to die, and most importantly, the Scouts have to be the ones to do it. A proposal like that would instantly catch Levi and Erwin by surprise, but before they can properly respond, a horrified Mikasa bursts into the room. Judging from the look on her face, the commander would wrongly assume that she just heard what Willy said, but in reality she didn't hear any of that, she was reacting to something else. While Erwin and Levi were down here in the prison, Mikasa and Floch spent the morning with Historia, testing whether the queen could really use her titan to fly. During these tests though, the queen would accidentally do something that no one else was expecting, and Mikasa would beg the commander to come and take a look for himself. The following day, the rumbling would start to have an impact in all corners of the earth, with the titan setting foot on multiple continents. Over in the Middle East, people would run for their lives as their whole civilization is crushed into the ground, while in Asia, Kiyomi's worst fear would become a reality. 2 days ago, she suspected something wasn't right when Hizuru lost contact with the Global Alliance, and that uneasy feeling was made worse when she heard rumors about Eldians receiving a message from Eren. In response, the Azumabito clan made extensive preparations to deal with any potential threat, mobilizing their flying boats, anti-titan cannons, and warships. Sadly for them, this wouldn't be enough, as the War Titans would easily brush off every single attempt to slow them down, continuing to march full speed into Hizuru. As Kiyomi then watches her country get trampled to dust, she'd wonder what would have happened if she'd made a different decision. When Willy first approached her with his proposal, she agreed to help the Global Alliance since it seemed like it was the only way Hizuru would be accepted back onto the world stage. However, if she answered differently and decided to stick with Erwin and the Scouts, then things probably wouldn't have come to this. In her final few seconds before the rumbling crushes her to death, Kiyomi would think briefly about Mikasa, cause as the only Asian living in Eldia, she'll be the last surviving member of the Azumabito clan. Now, switching back to Liberio, the ground would be violently shaking as the Titans make their way further into the city. A couple days earlier, when the Eldians heard Eren's message, they tried to convince the guards to let them escape, triggering a violent military response that led to several casualties. As a result, most people inside the internment zone became too afraid to speak up, and they chose to spend their final days with their families rather than fighting against the guards. In Gabi's case, she'd be spending time with Falco and the Grice family, and right now they'd all be terrified as the rumbling marches towards them. At the front of this march would be Eren, who's personally leading his army of Titans into Liberio, and the sight of the attack Titan would cause a stampede of people to run away. Gabi herself would stay frozen in fear, knowing there's no point trying to escape, but just as things seem their most hopeless, an unidentified creature quickly speeds through the sky. Seeing this from below, the young warrior candidate would instantly recognize it as a Titan, even though she's never seen anything like it. Colt would speculate that somehow this shifter might be Pieck, cause to him she's the only person left who'd be willing to charge headfirst into the rumbling. The reality, however, is that this flying titan is Historia, and riding on her back would be Erwin, Floch, Mikasa, and Captain Levi. Their mission right now is to peacefully convince Eren to stop the rumbling, and that means doing what they can to distract him while Historia tries to make contact. If successful, this would give them one final chance to talk things out in the past dimension, but in the back of Erwin and Levi's heads, they couldn't help but remember the warning they got from Willy Tybur. As the Jaw Titan then flies over the rumbling, her mouth would start to glow in a way that shocks everyone watching from inside the internment zone. Following a few seconds of build-up, Historia then releases a blast of superheated steam, vaporizing the napes of about a dozen titans marching towards Liberio. Those titans then fall to the ground, causing a chain reaction where other titans start to fall over them, and it's at this point Gabi would feel a sense of hope for the first time. By the way, in case you're wondering how this ability works, similar to the Colossal, Historia is able to burn muscle mass to generate steam, but instead of emitting that steam, she can store it internally. When the heat then builds up to an excessive temperature, her Titan can release it in one go, melting pretty much anything that happens to be in the way. The downside to this power is that, like I said, she needs to burn muscle mass to do this, meaning there needs to be a long regeneration period before she can do it again. Anyway, with a whole section of Wall Titans being wiped out, Eren would be surprised and mildly impressed by the attempt to stop him. Based on what happened in past, he knew that Erwin and Historia weren't happy about his choice, but he never imagined they'd go out of their way to stand against him. What makes it worse is that Mikasa is also part of the group, and for a second, her presence would make him question if he's really doing the right thing. His primary motivation for doing the rumbling was to protect the few people he has left, but if those same people truly don't want him to do this, then it's at least something to think about. As Eren stays deep in thought, Erwin would then dramatically leap from Historia to activate his colossal transformation. The commander's job in this moment is to essentially be a distraction by blocking the attack titan's path, giving the jaw enough time to swoop in. Remember, all Historia has to do is make the faintest contact for her plan to succeed, and it's why Erwin would scream at the top of his lungs to try and get Eren's attention. Despite the commander's best efforts though, Eren's eyes would stay firmly fixed on Historia as he tries to assess what's going on. He knows that if the scouts were here to kill him, then there's no way Mikasa would be involved, but at the same time, if they're here to stop the rumbling, then there's no way they can do that without killing him. While Eren racks his brain trying to figure out what they're up to, Historia would suddenly pick up the speed, and within a few seconds she'd be inches away from making contact. A blinding flash of light would then engulf the Jaw Titan, but as the people of Liberio observe the situation, pretty quickly Erwin would realize something's wrong. The scale of this lightning would be 1,000 times larger than expected, since the last time Historia touched Eren, she said there was only a tiny spark. This would cause Erwin to ask himself what could possibly be different, and to answer that question we need to flash back to their meeting with Zachary. During that conversation, Floch got the strange impression that the scouts care more about saving their enemies than they do about saving their own people. His paranoia got worse after having a dream of Eldia's future destruction, and so later that same night he made preparations to find out the truth. Knowing that Erwin would interrogate the prisoners from Marley, Floch paid one of the MPs to listen in and report everything back to him the following night. This meant that when Willy Tybur gave the commander a speech about needing to kill Eren, one of the guards on duty was secretly spying for the armored titan. At no point did the guard hear Erwin or Levi reject Willy's proposal, and when you remember that Levi is immune to the founder's mind control, killing Eren is actually within the realm of possibility. In theory, all it takes is for someone of Ackerman blood to be brought face to face with the attack titan, and once they're physically there, nothing can stop them from slicing the nape. These are the thoughts that Floch would be telling himself after finding out what Willy said, and at this moment he knew that somehow he had to intervene. That's why he pretended to be a good soldier as the scouts moved forward in their mission to stop Eren, and it's why in the second before Historia made contact, he found the courage to detonate his Titan. It was Floch's transformation into the armor that triggered this blinding flash of light, preventing Historia from touching Eren while also blasting the Ackermans at close range. His intention here was to eliminate the last remaining threats to the rumbling, ensuring that future generations of Eldians won't suffer the same fate he saw in his dream. With the Ackermans gone, there's no one left on Earth who can stand against the founder, and as Levi, Mikasa and Historia plummet towards the ground, Eren and the commander would only be able to watch on in disbelief. With that said, that's the end of part 6 of What If Erwin Got the Colossal Titan, and if you want this series to continue, then don't forget to hit that like button and obviously subscribe so you don't miss future content like this. Also, I'm interested to know what your favourite part of this particular video was, so if there's a moment that stands out to you, then let me know in the comments down below, and until the next one, peace out.